Emma loved the high ceilings and antique fixtures. Her apartment building had a past, a history whispered about by locals. Built in the 1800s, it had seen its share of life and perhaps death. Still, the rent was cheap and the location was perfect. She dismissed the creaking floorboards and flickering lights as mere quirks of an old building. There was an undeniable charm to it all. She felt strangely at home. It was an old, beautiful building, but it felt different at night. The shadows seemed to deepen. An unsettling stillness would descend. She brushed it off. It was just her imagination, or was it? The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. Something wasn't right. Days turned into weeks. Strange things began to happen. Objects moved slightly. A cup left on the counter would be inches away from its original position. She initially dismissed it. Perhaps she was just forgetful. But the incidents became more frequent, more deliberate. Her unease grew. A book flew off the shelf one evening. It slammed against the wall, landing at her feet. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She was alone in the apartment. There was no logical explanation. The room felt heavy, oppressive. She wasn't imagining things. Something was there with her. Sleep became a distant memory. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of leaves outside her window sent shivers down her spine. She felt watched constantly. A presence lingered in the shadows, unseen but felt. Emma was living in a state of perpetual fear, her haven transformed into a prison of her own paranoia. She tried to rationalize her fear. Old buildings settled, made noises. It was all in her head, but deep down she knew better. The feeling was too intense, too real. This was something else, something sinister. It was toying with her, feeding off her fear, and it was getting stronger. Desperate for reassurance, she confided in her friend Mark. He listened patiently, a skeptical frown etched on his face. He didn't dismiss her fears outright, but suggested more rational explanations. Stress, perhaps? Lack of sleep? He promised to stay over, see if he noticed anything unusual. Mark's presence offered a temporary reprieve. He was a beacon of normalcy in her increasingly unsettling world. But even his skepticism wavered as the night wore on. He too began to notice the subtle changes, the oppressive atmosphere. He couldn't explain it. Something was definitely off. He suggested they document everything just in case. Section 5. The Journal. Emma started a journal at Mark's suggestion. She meticulously recorded every detail, every strange occurrence. The moved objects, the disembodied whispers she swore she heard, the feeling of being constantly watched. Each entry was a testament to her unraveling sanity. The journal became her only confidant. Writing down the events somehow made them more real, more terrifying. She knew Mark was right. They needed proof. If something was truly happening, they needed to capture it. They set up cameras around the apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of the unseen. Section 6. The Camera's Eye. Days turned into weeks, and the cameras captured nothing out of the ordinary. Emma started to believe that perhaps Mark was right. Maybe it was all in her head. Then, one day, she reviewed the footage from the previous night. Her blood ran cold. There in the background, a fleeting shadow moved across the frame. It was gone in a flash, but it was there. Something unseen was in her apartment, something malevolent. She showed the footage to Mark. His skepticism finally crumbled, replaced by a look of sheer terror. They had proof, but what were they dealing with? Section 7. Mark's disappearance. The confirmation of the unseen entity sent a chill down their spines. Mark, once a skeptic, now shared Emma's fear. They decided to seek help, someone who could explain the unexplainable, but before they could act, Mark vanished. He disappeared from the apartment without a trace. Panic consumed Emma. She searched frantically, her heart pounding in her chest. Mark! His name echoed through the empty apartment. Silence. He was gone, taken by the same unseen force that haunted her. She was alone. The unseen observer had claimed its first victim, and she was next. Section 8. The final realization. Emma's world crumbled around her. The journal, the cameras, the unexplainable events, it all pointed to a terrifying truth. The unseen observer was real, and it was after her. She had to escape, but where could she go? As she frantically packed a bag, a cold wind swept through the apartment. The journal slipped from her grasp, falling open to the last entry. It's here, she had written, the unseen observer. I feel its presence, cold and menacing. It's watching me. It knows. She was trapped. There was no escape. The unseen observer had her now. Section 9. The unseen remains. Days later, the apartment stood empty. Emma vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and fear. The unseen observer remained, a lurking presence in the shadows. It patiently awaited its next victim, its hunger for fear never satiated. The apartment on Harbinger Lane stood silent, a testament to the unseen horrors that lurked within its walls. The rent remained cheap, the location ideal. The apartment on Harbinger Lane awaited its next tenant. Its dark history a secret whispered on the wind. Who would be the next to fall victim to the unseen observer?